And they say grudgingly, well, maybe. But
Well,
the hardest job, excuse me for interrupting, Michael. I was just going to close off by saying the hardest job I've ever had in my life is trying to get an American to sit down and write out a detailed written report of a UFO sighting and submit it. Most people just want to talk about it, but that doesn't do any good.
yeah, and I think a lot of people believe that maybe if they call you up and tell you their story, that you're going to be able to get the police out there or some kind of investigation started right away, and that just doesn't happen right away unless we have the facts and it warrants that kind of investigation. So at least they need to write the reports and get the information out there so that we can use it to study and find out what's really going on out there. And come to think of that, I understand that you do have some up-to-date sighting reports that maybe you could share with us tonight, and maybe we should get into some of those.
I'd love to, and some of them are real doozies. In fact, the first one I'd like to share with our listeners took place just a week ago, Saturday night, the 3rd of November of this year, of course, 2018, on Fire Island, or Watch Hill. This Fire Island is the southern boundary island on the southern coast of Long Island, New York. And this gentleman, I just talked to this gentleman this afternoon, actually, to see if we could get some more information. This report is not only posted, it's linked to from the homepage of our website, ufocenter.com. He writes that 5 people on the 3rd of November this year walked down to Fire Island, went out to Fire Island, and they were at a promontory, a high point for looking out over the ocean. 3 of the 5 decided to walk down closer to the shoreline on the boardwalk, so they walked away from the other 2 witnesses, and both groups suddenly became aware of a yellow-tinted light that was hovering to the south over the water. It was initially not terribly bright, but it appeared to have gained in brilliance, in illumination, so they could see a path of reflected light off the water from this object. Suddenly, it darted very suddenly, and it passed right overhead. As it passed overhead, the impression of at least one of the witnesses is that it split into 2, and there were 2 separate items, 2 separate objects that passed overhead, and then it continued going and went north, headed for Long Island. It's a very, very intriguing report, and I have talked twice to the source of it, and I'm impressed with how sincere he is. So that report is posted, and I would invite our listeners, if they're interested in reading it, to stay tuned, because the gentleman who posted it has promised me he would submit more information to describe a bit more precisely what the object looked like. And he's going to provide an illustration. He and his girlfriend are going to provide an illustration of what they both saw.
Oh, so that will be interesting. This seems to be another sober-minded witness then.
Absolutely. And I didn't detect even a trace of attempted chicanery as he and I talked. I think he was very sincere, and he was even a little bit upset. I think this may be his first UFO sighting. And the Fire Island, the location of this sighting is just approximately 12 or 14 miles to the east of JFK Airport on Long Island. So this is a heavily populated area. God only knows how many more people may have seen the same thing but have not thought to submit a report.
Yes, and my goodness, that was just last week. I just love it when you bring these timely reports, and historic reports, of course, but that was just last week. Yeah,
I'm looking at my timepiece here, and almost exactly 1 week ago. The sighting occurred at 11 p.m. East Coast time. So it was
Yeah, you're right.
quite something. It was daylight time. It was the night we changed from daylight to standard time. I have another report that is, in my opinion, equally dramatic. This one occurred 4 days after the sighting on Fire Island. This occurred in Faison, North Carolina, which is just south of Raleigh, probably about 50 miles south of Raleigh. A gentleman was driving from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, down to Wilmington, and he had passed through Raleigh, and he was headed south. He says east in his report, but I think the map tells me he was going south. He looked out ahead of him. This is 3 days ago. This is the 7th of November, 7:35 p.m. He recorded the time to his great credit. He was driving on Interstate 40, driving to the south, doing about 70 miles an hour, he estimates. When he looked out ahead of him, off to the left of the highway, he saw a very peculiar bright light. Well, he had driven this stretch of the highway so many times he knew that there was not a tall building out there, so his attention was drawn to this strange and very bright light. As he got closer at 70 miles an hour, he became more and more intrigued by it, and suddenly he realized that that bright light was not by itself. It was attached to a chevron-shaped craft of some variety. At first he perceived that it was a B-2 bomber, the so-called stealth bomber.
Yeah.
But then he realized that it was hovering almost motionless, and then, to his amazement, he realized that there were two more similar objects, similar in appearance to the first one, just beyond the first one. They were all pointed with their noses to the north, headed north. He was going to the south, of course. And people can read that report in detail on our website at ufocenter.com. It was apparently a very dramatic sighting.
My goodness, not one chevron like the Phoenix Lights craft, sounds like, but three of them, basically. Yeah.
Well, very similar to Phoenix. The Phoenix Lights event, we believe, based on the fine work by Dr. Michael Tanner and Jim De La Toso, involved 6 very, very large objects. When I say large, I can share with our audience what the size of these objects over Phoenix. Good Lord, it's 21 years ago. That's hard for me to believe. It's so much time has passed. But one of the objects hovered over Camelback Mountain, and it was in excess, we estimate, based on eyewitness reports, we estimate that it was over 8 miles, 8 statute terrestrial miles from wingtip to wingtip.
Oh, my goodness. Yes.
I'm amused by those people who always say, well, there couldn't be life out there around that star because there are no planets. Well, I think we're dealing with creatures that have the ability to build their own homes, like a turtle carrying its own shell. And the analogy I use is if 50,000 years ago you had gone back and interviewed a cave dweller in Europe and tried to describe to him a place like Kansas, he would have said, oh, it's so flat and so hot, and most of all, nobody could live there because they don't have any caves in this theoretical place called Kansas. And furthermore, how would you get there? Well, it's a good analogy for what skeptics say about UFOs and the distances they have to travel and whether they need a planet or not. I look at a planet as a springboard for life, but you infect a sterile planet with a few paramecium or insects and come back 2 or 3 billion years later, there are going to be some pretty smart paramecium and pretty smart insects that may just have a sophisticated technology.
Yeah, and what a better idea than to get off the planets, which are constantly having geological effects and all that kind of stuff, and control your own environment in space. Maybe that's what they're doing.
Yeah. And I agree with you. A planet is a very, very dangerous place to live because if you're born and raised on it, you're probably confined to it. You can't move it to get out of the way of a hurtling asteroid that could exterminate life on the planet instantly.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, this is fascinating stuff. Do you have any other reports we want to get to towards the last? Well, we got about 6 minutes left here. Is there anything else that we need to know about before we send you off on your rest of the weekend?
Well, let me share another recent report, if I may. And this is just 2 days ago, from November 8th. This is from Tonawanda, New York, and this one is also, I believe, linked to from our website at ufocenter.com. A gentleman who describes himself as a professional driver was, I think he was driving, I'm not sure he says exactly, but the sky was almost occluded totally with either solid overcast or solid cloud. And he alleges, and people can read this report with their own eyes if they choose to, that a cylinder or a disc-shaped object, red in color, dropped down out of the clouds, streaked across the sky, stopped, and then went back up into the clouds. This is an incident that took less than a minute, he estimates, perhaps half that amount of time. But this type of report is coming to the National UFO Reporting Center on a regular basis from around the world.
Oh man, it sounds like things are happening out there. I'm so glad that you are able to come on our show every once in a while to kind of keep that in the forefront of people's minds that things like this are happening all the time, and they don't need to have any trepidations anymore to report these strange events. I think ever since the New York Times came out December 16th of last year, 2017, people are feeling much more comfortable telling their sighting reports. So I think that's what we need to keep doing.
Yeah. And I'd like to emphasize, I understand that we have an international community listening to us tonight around the world.
Yes.
And we're every bit as interested in reports from Africa and Asia and Europe, even the Antarctic and South America. And if people don't speak English, we invite them to submit a report in their native language, and we'll find some way or someone to translate it for us.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Because you're right, there are many non-English speaking witnesses out there, I'll bet.
Yeah. I just received a report in, I think it's Spanish, if I remember correctly. And we'll find somebody to translate it, and we'll post it in both Spanish and in English. So anybody who's interested will be able to read it and understand what's written there.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. In just the last couple minutes we have, Peter, I thought what I should do is at least give everyone a heads up about this Project Blue Book television series that's coming down on the History Channel January 11th next year. Just not that far off, actually. And the fact that we are, as the UFO I-Team, has been invited to participate in the pre-screening of the Project Blue Book initial episode downtown Seattle this coming Thursday. That'd be November 15th at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So I'm excited to see how they're going to treat Dr. J. Allen Hynek's story with investigating UFOs with the Air Force.
That sounds like a lot of fun, and you're the right person to do that, Michael. Being the team leader for the UFO I-Team, you've done a magnificent job of organizing a bunch of different people like herding cats.
that's, that's my favorite saying. You're right.